I'm Brian Hoop, Executive Director for Housing Oregon. We're the statewide association of the affordable housing industry, representing about 147 mission-driven organizations and allied businesses, representing from the homeless services to homeownership organizations and multifamily rental housing developers. And we're excited today to have several of our friends from Strategies 360 joining us for a workshop to help provide skills about how to potentially apply for and access federal congressionally approved earmarks. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Marissa Cade.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Marissa Cade, and I'm happy to see you all. Some familiar faces from the Housing Oregon Conference. With me today is Bobby Lee from our management team here at Strategies 360 in Oregon, and Tyler Wilson from Washington, D.C. So, my experience, just a quick introduction here. I am a lobbyist here in Oregon primarily. I've been working with a lot of coalitions over the years. I actually worked with a foster care coalition called Foster Homes of Healing that we partnered for some federal earmarking projects and were successful with those in addition to our state advocacy around budget acquisition here in the state of Oregon. So that's what my experience around earmarking comes from, that side of things. And I'll pass it over to Tyler to talk a little bit about his experience.
Thanks, Marissa. Good morning, everybody. Tyler Wilson. A little bit of background for me. I've have about 10 years of experience working in Congress for two different House members. Most recently was Chief of Staff to a member of Congress before coming over to Strategies 360. So have worked on policy issues related to housing, infrastructure, community development, among others, for quite a few years. Also have experience in developing and securing some uh, federal earmarks as well, both on the congressional side and then also on the side of helping clients develop those and secure those. So um, happy to be with you all this morning.
Thanks so much, Tyler. Bobby, did you want to say hi quick to everyone? And then I'm going to also begin sharing my screen.
Hello, Bobby Lee with Strategy 360. Thank you for allowing us to do this.
Great. All right. So that's us. So first, we just wanted to be sure there's kind of a wide gamut of experience that's possible in this process, and so we just thought we'd start with a question right off the bat, and we're going to go ahead and introduce a poll to you as well, to just kind of capture some of the basic information that will help us tailor this conversation today so it's most useful for you. So the thing we wanted to ask to begin with is, did you come into this meeting with any specific questions in mind? Maybe you're considering embarking on the appropriations conversation and have some specific questions about that, or maybe just some general questions that you're hoping will answer over the course of today's presentation. So feel free to unmute or jump into the chat. Just wanted to open it up right off the bat for questions.
Marissa, this is Brian. You want me to start the poll now or open it
Sure,
up?
great. Yes, thank you. Awesome.
It's just a simple three-question poll.
Yeah. So while you guys are doing that, um, has anybody participated in an earmarking process before? Oops. Oh dear. There we go. Too many things buzzing around on my screen. If we don't have any specific questions, then we can definitely just go ahead and get started.
I have a question.
Oh, sure. Evan.
Sorry, I couldn't find my raise hand button. Um, we have two CPS funded allocations from Congress, one from 23, one from 24. They've both been renewed as the budget has continued to not be passed. And my question is, and maybe others of us on the call also have some CDS money, is this expected to ever, is there any liquidity behind these promises, or is this going to be waiting for another budget to pass, or is there some other way that they'll just be stuck in there possibly forever?
That's a very good question, Kevin. Um, and it's certainly one that is on the top of everyone's mind who worked very hard in the last fiscal year to secure some, earmark projects, including members of Congress. As many of you may know, last fiscal year, so that would be FY26, federal fiscal year FY26, or I'm sorry, 25, excuse me. Um, Congress passed a year-long continuing resolution. Congress rarely puts congressionally directed spending or earmarks into those continuing resolutions. So all of that work in federal fiscal year 25 pretty much, I mean, went nowhere, to put it bluntly. So a lot of those projects, and sounds like even some of you have gone back to those members of Congress and said, well, let's try and get those projects into the federal FY26 appropriations process. So in both the House and the Senate, those appropriations bills have been advanced out of the subcommittee and the appropriations committee. Um, haven't, passed the House or Senate yet. Well, I shouldn't say that. A couple bills have been signed into law, full appropriations bills for this federal year FY26 process, including agriculture. So that your question kind of comes down to an outlook on what's happening with appropriations for the rest of the federal agencies this fiscal year. Um, the Senate right now is in particular trying to get sign off from all of their members for packaging some of the remaining bills together and trying to pass them through the Senate to strengthen the Senate's hand in negotiating with the House. Both House and Senate Appropriations Committee leaders are negotiating kind of what their top line of discretionary appropriations level is going to be, which is another kind of key step in the process of advancing the full appropriations bills. Um, I will say there's there's a lot of hope that appropriations bills like the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development Bill, THUD, which is likely where, housing, related earmarks would be. There's a lot of hope that that bill will be able to move forward since it's considered one of the less controversial ones. Um, so, you know, I don't, I feel pretty good about these bills being signed into the full bills being signed into law. There are a lot of kind of other political factors going into the appropriations process this fiscal year in particular, around, the Trump administration's freezing of funds, rescission of funds, and OMB impounding funding. So, you know, I think Congress and the Appropriations Committee committees in particular are really trying to reassert or assert, if you will, their appropriations authority this fiscal year. So, you know, can't say for certain, of course, but I think there's more bipartisan support and more aggressiveness on trying to negotiate and get full appropriations bills done this fiscal year than there was last fiscal year. So over the next month, we'll really see that debate kick up more and more on trying to get, these full bills passed.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Tyler. For those
Mar
that just
Marissa,
joined,
I'll go
yes,
ahead and end the poll.
um,
Yeah.
sure. For those that just joined, we were asking everyone if they had an opening question that they were coming into the room with, and that was Kevin's was about the likelihood of the full um, bills passing with the budgets that have been kind of cans kicked down the road for several congressional sessions, going back. So thank you for that, Tyler. And we've got the poll results, and it looks like, a good half of you have not participated in an earmarking process in the past, but over a dozen have. So that's great. That helps us narrow our focus a little today. So thank you. I'll share those results just for interest. All right. So this poll thing won't leave my screen. There we go. Um, yeah. So Tyler, why don't you introduce us? What in the world is an earmark anyway? What a weird word.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, we're kind of flipping it back to the beginning here, backing it up into, the very kind of basic of what an earmark is. So, to get really down to it, Congress has the sole power to make appropriations from the Treasury and to tax. So many members of Congress view earmarks as one of their kind of constitutional duties, and view these as a way for them to make sure that priorities in their congressional districts and in their states are attended to. Many members of Congress think that, you know, they know where funding should go into their districts and states better than a federal agency and a staff person, possibly, who's in Washington, D.C., making decisions on kind of competitive grant applications, for example. So an earmark is really kind of the ability for a member of Congress to direct a certain amount of funding to a project that they deem to be worthy and deserving of funding in their district or state. Um, Congress has set up, some parameters around how, what types of earmarks they will consider, how they're funded, the process, what levels of support you need to have and show. So there are different kind of rules as far as that goes on the congressional committee level. the individual member of Congress level as well. So, the kind of important thing to remember about earmarks is that these are one-time project funds. So they are not multi-year kind of continuing appropriations or grants. So it's not necessarily a way to fund a project long term, but is a great way to get an injection of capital, into a project for one fiscal year. So kind of getting into a little bit more then about the process and eligibility for earmarks. Um, these requests typically are made by local and state governments. We do see a lot of requests coming in from colleges, universities, tribes as well, and then also critically, nonprofit organizations. There is a rule against private businesses and entities, applying for and receiving earmark funding. Um, so some members of Congress only allow local, state, governmental, entities to apply for earmarks. Um, that is not the case in Oregon with your senators. So that's not a concern for your state. Um, Now, that application process, also happens at the member of Congress level. Then it goes to the committee level. Um, those requests by those members of Congress, are reviewed by the Appropriations Committee. And then, there are various kind of categories of earmark requests that can be made. So it's kind of organized by the federal agencies and kind of the applicable programs that exist as far as what you can request um, earmark funding for. And so Congress has really tied um, the eligibility for earmarks for the projects, to the existing kind of federal uh, programs that are authorized. So like, I think the most applicable one, for your all's work is probably the Community Development Fund, also known as CDBG. Um, and so earmarks through the Community Development Fund or have to be able to demonstrate that they are within the scope of eligible projects for CDBG. You don't have to qualify for formula CDBG funding, but they have kind of aligned Community Development Fund earmark eligibility to the types of projects that would be eligible through uh, CDBG funding. Um, so they do this with most accounts where, because these programs are congressionally authorized, they kind of have a framework to, um, you know, require earmarks to stick to. Um,
Great. Thank you, Tyler. So
yeah,
let's get into the timeline a little bit and sort of what it looks like to functionally walk through this process. And also, we'll give a little bit after that, we'll get into the strategy, which includes a conversation around the types of things that appropriators love to see in an application. So, let's start with the timeline and then we'll get into a little bit more around the types of projects that would be great fit.
yeah, thanks. And, as you can hear, it can get a little bit complicated. So having the timeline in mind, and having some of these markers is really important as when you're considering and developing a potential project. So thinking about this is really something you do want to start in the fall slash now, um, where you kind of develop that initial idea, whether that's a white paper or just an idea of what your request could be, and kind of thinking through what you need, where you're at in the process, other funding sources, etc. Then, in early January, early to mid-January, you really want to kind of hone in on 1 to 2 priority projects. Um, that's really, kind of the maximum that you're going to be able to put forward um, through this process. And then, building out the details around those 1 to 2 priority projects. We then will work with folks to review those, figure out what may be the best account and appropriation subcommittee, which member of the House delegation may be, most appropriate to approach on that, which, senator may have an interest in that area. Then, toward the end of January, early February, you really want to be ready to have kind of a one pager that can be shared with the congressional delegation and with staff to start kind of socializing that request. Then, after early February, um, the budget is supposed to be out then. That usually turns into late February, and then once the budget's out, that is really the time when members of Congress will start opening up their appropriations portals to submit those project requests. So again, that's kind of a late February timeframe where you'll want to be submitting those kind of final projects.
Yeah,
Um,
my experience too,
yeah,
before
go ahead.
we move on, is right now is fine, is like a perfectly acceptable time to be kicking around some ideas and starting to tune them a little bit, especially if you pair that with getting prepared to put a meeting request in to begin meeting with delegation staff as soon as they return from the break. To like maybe even just tickling for them that you're interested in having a conversation about this kind of thing, so you're on their radar when they return from Christmas break, and that way, we've talked about this at the Housing Oregon conference around also being prepared to receive feedback that may lead your request in a different direction. And so indicating ahead of time that you're open to that, and underlining the critical need for the types of projects that you do or that your organization does, are all things you can start highlighting early before you even get into the nitty gritty and just get in on the radar screen for folks.
Tyler and Marissa, this is Brian. There's a question in the chat that might be on a lot of people's minds.
Yeah.
Do organizations need to work with a group like Strategy 360, or could they contact their senators or U.S. representatives directly on their own?
I'm sure Tyler has plenty to say about this, but I'll start because I have less to say, and I'll just say it's very helpful. It's difficult to manage the level of interaction and material gathering and knowing the finer points of like what gets something over the line in this process, as opposed to what may seem like a really great idea in a grant application, because it's so different from a grant process that folks can conflate what would be successful with maybe what a successful grant application might look like. So it's very helpful to have someone managing the process, handling, and then there's also the relationship. So Tyler, why don't you talk about that too?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, you don't need to, but yes, it is very helpful. There's a lot of conversations and back and forth that does happen with the staff in the offices that are, kind of compiling and putting all this together and, getting these requests in front of their boss and, you know talking about which ones should be the priorities. So, it is helpful to have, an organization like, S360 and have someone in DC, who is able to kind of, build and maintain some of those relationships with the staff and, do the in-person meetings, um, and, go back and forth on some of those details. And um, so, yeah,
Thank you,
I,
Tyler. Great
yeah.
question.
And I'd say just one other kind of note on that. Um, it is helpful to also build a relationship and do some education with the House and Senate Appropriations Committee staff as well, and particularly the subcommittee staff, as they're then kind of that next level of review and approval on making sure that what the members of the delegation are putting forward and align with the chair's priorities.
Thanks, Tyler. So I think we're pretty close. Did we have until 9:30 or am I misremembering that?
Well, we're scheduled till 10.
Oh, great. Well, then that's perfect. So I was worried about that. Okay, here we go. Let's talk about the application process and how that works, Tyler. And then from there, we'll get into the strategy that we typically use when for strategies 360.
Yeah. So, you know, it, every member of Congress has a slightly different application process, which makes this really fun every January and February to be kind of jumping in and tracking, 50, 60 different processes and timelines and requirements. But overall, what you're going to want to prepare is a clear statement of how the money is going to be used. And then also, you know, it's also helpful to say, you know, this is only going to be a one-time need. Here are some of the other sources of funding that we're exploring or have secured already, and how the federal earmark kind of fits into the overall, project kind of investments. Um, of course, for an application, you want to make sure that you know which appropriations subcommittee and account this is coming from. The other thing that's really important that more and more members of Congress are requiring now are letters of support, um, often from uh, local government or state government. This is not a requirement for every member, but for certain types of projects, they do often like to see, like that the city is supportive of this project. So that's something that can take a little bit of, lead time to put together and get ready. So kind of going back to that timeline and keeping that in mind. Um, so, the process, once you kind of get that application in, again, members of Congress will have portals that open up. often you need to be proactive in reaching out to those members of Congress and asking
Geometry is
them
outdated.
to give you access um, to those appropriations portals. The senators in particular, you often have to, call or reach out to them to get access to that. So you're filling out that request form, or like we would fill out that request form for you, and kind of get all that information entered. Of course, flag that for the appropriate staff, um, etc. Once that happens, then there's a deadline, an internal deadline in Congress that the members of Congress have to meet for the appropriations committees, and then they're going through and reviewing all of those as well.
Thank you, Tyler. So as we, have kind of already gone through, to summarize here, we start now, we build up the details and start gathering that support and connecting to the delegation. And just as a reminder, this is one-time funds, and the sweet spot is between 500 grand and 2 million bucks of one-time funds. And that's not to say that it necessarily, I mean, in this setting with your membership, very likely could be some capital cost or some element of a project that's sort of foundational to its success. But having done this in the foster care universe and for our nonprofit members that do homeless services, it's also possible to do a demonstration project or some other more of a social service project with these funds. Although it's a different budget and a different uh, um, set of priorities and requirements for that. So you just have to be really clear about how it's a one-time spend, what the result, what they're buying with that one-time spend, because the members want to be able to stand next to the thing that they built in the district and say, look what we can do. And you've got to create an opportunity for that. We've done that by inviting members to a nonprofit for a day of celebration around the completion of the project. And so there are creative ways to give them that opportunity, even if it's not, look at all these hospital beds I bought. So there's ways to do that, but we can help with that as well. And then we also can help evaluate which projects would be most successful. And I think, Tyler, would you like to talk a little bit about that, about some of the key factors that you look for in a highly likely to be successful project?
Yeah, so that's there are a lot of factors that go into what is going to be successful. But some of the most important ones are having your kind of budget in place and knowing um, what that looks like for future years, making sure that it's clear that you're not going to be coming back year after year, necessarily for the same thing. Um, Having a reasonable request, again, as we kind of say in here, the sweet spot is between 500,000 and 2 million, um, which is a bit of a variation, but and then making sure that your project is well aligned with the account and the subcommittee that you're requesting funding through, um, is important. And then also having that level of community support. That is also very important. Projects that are coordinated with both the House and Senate members are also much more successful. Um, And then, another kind of layer on these is making sure that you are, if possible, you are aligning with the priorities for that account of the chair of the subcommittee in both the House and the Senate. Um, because they ultimately have to decide, how many of these projects do we want to award? What categories of projects do we want to award within that account? And which members of Congress, who is going to get X number of projects? The senators obviously get a lot more projects than the House members do. Um, so then also, when thinking about that, you want to make sure that your project is unique and it's not kind of the same as 50 other entities that are all applying, to one congressperson's process. Because then how are they picking out of those 50? So you
Mhm.
want to be able to kind of stand out based on your, the uniqueness of the project, the community support, the need of the project, um, and kind of all those other, factors that we talked about already.
Thanks,
Ty-
Tyler.
Tyler and Marissa,
Yeah.
there was a question in the chat that I think is related to something Tyler just said about coordination between Congress people. Will Senators Merkley and Wyden be continuing to run joint application process? And do you recommend applying to both your senators and your district representative, to all of them?
So far as I know, yes, Merkley and Wyden have had that shared application process for a number of years. And Tyler, what do you think? What would you like to say about the um, across the
I,
chambers?
I I do think it's helpful, and we've been encouraging, the House members to also kind of express their support for projects to the senators. Um, particularly when there's a political dynamic of, having Democrat House members, because the Democrat House members have even less projects that get awarded than Republican House members do. And so, when you have a situation of a, all Democrat delegation, when the House and Senate are controlled by the Republicans, it can be helpful to have the House member, reinforce their support to the senators who have a higher chance of getting um, more projects approved. Now, the other thing about the House, applying to both the House and the senators is if you are able to get, the project in both the House and Senate version of the bill, you're much more likely to be in the final bill as well. Because once you clear those, getting it in the House bill or in the Senate bill, the House and Senate still have to come together and agree on which projects are moving forward um, in a final package as well.
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's a great tie-in also to support from local officials. So, just by way of example, we had a foster care project for support and training for a new cohort of culturally specific providers in the state of Oregon. And we got a letter of support from the governor's office, who included in her recommended budget expansion of that level of care in foster care. So it was like this 1-2 punch where we had both chambers recommending an investment in this foster care project, and then the state saying not only that, but we now have it in our appropriations process. We're requesting that the legislature fund the capacity to expand on this project. And then we were able to kind of flip that over and do it again. And so then we came back again and said, and so we got like this 1-2 punch where it's like the state is making the investment in the ongoing capacity, and the feds were um, earmarking for these demonstration projects to set up the cohort that would carry out the capacity building. So it was a great symbiosis, and that's something that can be done as well. Is like not only doing both chambers, but also getting some agreement from the state to pursue. The timelines don't quite add up, but we're in December now, and in a year from now, this is a great tie-in to my next slide, actually. A year from now, the Oregon budget cycle will begin, and it will start in December with the governor's recommended budget. So in the fall, advocates are seeking support for their investments and trying to get investments into that recommended budget, because it's easier to go through the legislative budgeting process in the state defending the governor's budget rather than trying to get them to add something to in the budget process. And if you can get a letter of support from a governor or a legislator and some indication that there'll be ongoing funding that's related to this project coming through the state apparatus, that's a great way to get a lot of support for a project. So I wanted to float that as well. And I know you guys have Kevin, who is awesome, who supports a lot of your government relations work, and he's well aware of this cycle. And but this is something that we support as well. So I won't get too much into the weeds here. The slide has the details, and Kevin's walked you all through it, but we're just in the rebalance coming into the 2026 short session, and then the appropriations process for the next biennium budget here in the state of Oregon will begin after that. So that advocacy, the earlier you start it, the better, especially in a budget cycle like we're experiencing here with economic downturn and loss of federal funds here in Oregon. But then we also have congressional members who are interested in bringing some money home, considering the other losses that we're experiencing. So just wanted to flag that connection between the state process and the federal process. Is there anything else you want to say about that, about the local elected officials, Tyler, before I move on?
No, just yeah, that buy-in is really important.
Great. So a number of folks in the room today have never been through an earmarking process. And we've gone over much of this, but just to kind of wrap it up and make it concise, we have a couple of slides about the sort of earmarking 101. If you would go through that, Tyler.
Yeah, so once you kind of have your project, know what you want to do, have a general idea of what account you would be looking at, that sort of thing. If you are working around the state, or that you're kind of still trying to decide that. Um, one of the first things, I mean, is just to identify the members of Congress that would be impacted by your project, um, which district you're in. So fairly basic thing there. Um, but I think, the third bullet is an important one, which is who is going to be kind of a champion for this project. And that's a factor in success. So, is there a member of Congress who has strong passion for, affordable housing, or, addressing, homelessness issues? Um, and the reason you want to do that is, one, that's in their priorities, but, two, they get a lot of requests, and the staff and the member are going to have a conversation before they submit their request to the appropriations committee of, okay, we only get we're only going to get three earmarks out of this entire subcommittee. What are our top three priorities? Um, and if you don't make that list, you're certainly not going to get funded. So, it's important to, align your project with who those champions could be. Um, and then working really closely with those offices, kind of going back to that relationship building piece, working closely with those offices to make sure kind of the details line up with the members' priorities, and all your kind of ducks are in a row as far as the numbers and the requests and all that. And then continuing to work with them throughout the process. Once it goes to the appropriations committee of, are there some key kind of levers that you can pull, or pressure points to make sure that funding is getting included in the bills that are getting passed from the appropriations committee. Um, so, we kind of hit on a few of these already, but just to kind of review, the House is more restrictive. So again, that's why, um, and sorry, there's a typo in here. Uh,
Ah.
Not Senator Markley, Senator Merkley. Um, but yes, definitely, the other thing to think about, you all are lucky in that you do have an appropriator as a senator, and one who is the ranking member of a subcommittee as well. So, he definitely carries more sway in, the number of projects that he's able to get funded.
Yeah, and I would just say too, we're also lucky that our delegation works really well together across the chamber. So they have good relationships across the House and Senate here in Oregon, and that's not always the case.
Yeah,
All right.
definitely.
Um, well, since we
Marissa,
have yes,
Marissa and Tyler, can we just do one or two questions from chat real quick?
please, yes.
So one question was, um, oh, maybe Tyler just answers in the chat. Among
Sorry.
earmark requests that meet the criteria and that are reasonable, what's the ballpark success rate for projects in the affordable housing space?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to kind of give you uh even a ballpark success rate, just because this is such a murky process, where each member of Congress has their own process, and they don't necessarily release all of the projects that they received. They will typically only post the projects that they have submitted to the appropriations committee. And then, to kind of get a sense of that, you'd have to go to every member of Congress's website, and kind of put together a spreadsheet and then cross-reference that with the appropriations bills that are passed. So, long story short, that's hard to ballpark, but I would say that there is a account very specifically dedicated to um, affordable housing projects, and that is the HUD's Department of Housing and Urban Development's Community Development Fund, slash, they call it something different in the House, but economic development initiatives. So, there are a number of, as you can see from the slide, actually, a number of housing projects that get funded each cycle. Well, in theory, each cycle, uh, even just for, the state of Oregon or the state of Washington.
Thank you, Tyler. Michael?
Yes, thanks. One comment and then one question. Back on the timeline 2 slide at the very end, it said you'll get your money in 6 to 9 months. And I just want to, as a rep, I work for the city of Salem and I supervise the federal program staff. There's a really important piece about getting that money, and that's the environmental review, particularly if you're getting it through CDBG. That takes some extra time and some effort, and most participating jurisdictions who are responsible entities don't have the staff to actually do the ER. So that usually falls upon the recipient of the money to either initiate it or hire a consultant to do it. So that 6 to 9 months can stretch with an environmental review. That's the comment. The question is this, is that the participating jurisdictions, as we're getting our HUD grants for this federal fiscal year, have this addendum 1. I don't know if you've heard of that or not. But it's an addendum that all of the HUD grants that are coming down for public housing for CDBG basically say that you have to, assist federal government in immigration enforcement, and you have to ensure that there's no federal assistance going to non-residents. So is that to be expected also when an earmark comes down?
Good question. Yes. So on the back end of these, and thank you for raising the environmental review piece. That is a key consideration. So similarly, that is kind of another federal law that impacts these projects because the money is still going through Department of Housing and Urban Development. If you do secure funding through this, like you will still be working with the Department of Housing and Urban Development on the scope of work, how the money is being spent, getting those project approvals like the environmental review. But that also means that you will also be subject to whatever other, laws may impact those types of projects as specified in federal law. And the same applies to potential executive orders. Um, and so, if there are executive orders, which is, what that addendum 1 you're referring to is coming through, they likely would be, subject to those requirements as well. And, you all probably have gone through this already with, executive orders that came out earlier in the year, relating to diversity, equity, and inclusion and religious issues, et cetera. But like being able to demonstrate in some way compliance or, potential compliance with those executive orders, if they carry the force of, requirements and law through the project agreement or through the funding agreement with Department of Housing and Urban Development, they would be subject to that as well. Yeah. That was a long-winded way of saying yes to your question.
Yeah, it was a good question. And I think, too, another great reason to reach out to the governor's office and their policy staff with regards to housing and homelessness. Make them aware of your request and ask for their support as well, because the governor of Oregon is very much involved with the Attorney General's office in Oregon and navigating the terrain of where Oregon law and federal law diverge around being a sanctuary state, et cetera. And so it's really a good idea to have your requests on the radar of the governor's policy staff and having that as a resource to get support around looking at these issues and what they might mean in practice for your organization. All right. Well, we have just a few minutes left. So I just wanted to open it up for questions. And at this time, if you have an idea for an earmark request that you want to share and see if Tyler maybe has any wisdom to share with you about your idea, we'd welcome that as well. So we have just a few minutes. Please chime in, unmute, and I'm actually gonna just stop sharing so we can all see each other, and folks can
This is
ask.
Brian.
Yeah.
Marissa and Tyler, there was a question in the chat. If your project is included in the FY26 Transportation HUD Draft Appropriations Bill, how would you suggest trying to move that forward? Or would you recommend starting over planning and resubmitting the project for FY27 at this point?
Good question. So I guess, to one on the member level, depending on who was successful in getting that project included in FY26, um, you know, reaching out to them, and checking in on that would be a good first step. The second thing I would say would be to have, to basically encourage, um, if you have a way to get to Senator Merkley or committee staff, um, either in the minority or on the majority, and encourage them to ensure that your project is included in the final version of the T-HUD bill. And then kind of sitting at a higher level than that, this is going to sound silly, but generally encouraging Senate and House appropriations leadership and leadership of Senate and House generally to come together to pass the final appropriations bills is kind of the next step there.
And
That's
with
really,
regard, oh,
yeah, go ahead, Marissa.
I was just going to say, with regards to touching back with members themselves around the urgency and importance of the project that you have in the wings, don't be afraid to get your top donor or your best, board chair or the person in your organization who seems to be the most connected, who has all these guys' cell phone numbers, to like ping them and say, hey, did you see this application? I just want to make sure it's on your radar screen. And there's no shame in using your personal relationships and the folks that you have that have those relationships that are part of building your organizations and building access to housing for Oregonians. Those relationships are part of how this works. And they might be just happy to do it and offended if they find out you didn't ask. So let them know, let your board chair know, let your top donors know what you're up to and how they can help.
Well, I want to be respectful of time. So it is 10 o'clock now.
Yeah.
I don't know if you
Thanks.
want to stay an extra minute or two or not, but
Well, I'll just wrap it up and say thank you. Thank you all very much. And we're available. Our doors open. We can work with individuals or groups to work through these processes and support you in getting your appropriations requests in and through the process. So let us know how we can be helpful. And for those of you who provided your email address, we will be reaching out. Thank you.
And can I just ask Marissa, if someone did not fill out the poll at the beginning, how can they contact you?
Yes, thank you. I will put my contact information in the chat. And please, also, Brian has all of our information and can help you as well. So don't be stingy with our email address, Brian.
All right, I will keep this open for another minute or two while we wait for Marissa's email. Thanks, everyone. Have a good
Thank you,
day.
guys. Have a great day. Happy holiday
Thanks,
season.
everybody. Take
Thank
care.
you. Take care.